what they could do to help. They went to the capital here, Kiev. They also went to Donetsk down here, right by the border with Russia, and they were also in the western part of the country, closer to Europe. My guest standing by is Dr. George Huculak, family doctor, spent 11 days in Ukraine, just got back on Monday. George, thanks for your time today. Let's talk about the differences that you saw in the different regions of this country.
Well, it's very interesting. We got there as a group and tried to do a medical needs assessment to see how we could best benefit what is required in Ukraine following the aftermath of the Euromaidan. We initially started our trip in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine and then visited Kyiv, the capital, and then ended our trip in Lviv. And we noted that across the board, there are very significant requirements in the healthcare system. Unfortunately, the previous regime of Yanukovych, they really elevated corruption to an unprecedented level. And one of the sufferers of these policies was the medical healthcare system. In the East particularly, we noticed that traumatic medical care is very wanting. There's one trauma center for the whole oblast, which is the equivalent of a province, with 10 ICU beds and only 4 ventilators. So their needs are very acute and ongoing. They're going to need very many things too.
Let's talk about the goal of the trip, and I guess I know that there was a specific goal that you wanted to do when we spoke to you 2 weeks ago on the way over there. You wanted to try and formalize some type of a sort of partnership. What would you like to see happen?
Well, having boots on the ground there was really helpful because we got to speak with people, healthcare providers from all levels, from the very basic, students who helped provide medical aid and medics on the Maidan, to hospitals which accepted people, to government officials, both local and national. And what we found is that there would be a great benefit to have a collaboration between Canadian medical professionals and Ukrainian medical professionals. We found on many levels this could be helpful.
Who's going to fund this? Where will the money come from? Are you looking for donations?
Well, we are going to be looking for funding. There's the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, which has been very supportive, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. A number of individuals, both in and outside of the Ukrainian community in Canada, have indicated a willingness to help. And we're also hoping very much that the Canadian government will continue to show the leadership that it has been showing, in this case, in the medical sphere.
I want to ask you about Donetsk in the east, which is, as I mentioned off the top, not far from the border with Russia. This is the area where a group of separatists have declared the Donetsk People's Republic, a group of people that want closer ties to Russia. They almost want a Crimea situation. This is very tense, very heavy. We've seen violence. What was it like for you being in that city?
It was very interesting to fly to Donetsk. The evening we came in, after a relative lull in activity for the previous 2 weeks, we had heard that the illegal sort of Russian insurgents had captured a number of government and municipal buildings. And while we were doing our tour of the medical facilities and interacting with professionals in the area, there was very real on-the-ground responses going on with response to the crisis. We had to divert a little bit of our activity because it would have brought us relatively close to some of the hostile activity. We weren't at any point in the line of fire, but we were certainly needing to be prudent about where we went.
What are your plans, George, to go back?
My plans personally, I'm ready to go back as needed. I think we need a little bit of time to formulate our response. We realize that in the short term, the medics, the people on the ground, are going to need medical equipment, supplies, and means with which to deal with the injuries that have already occurred and any future injuries that might come about. In the medium term, we've identified that in hospitals, they're greatly needing for resources and equipment. And in the long term, we have to try and hope that, our governments and our medical professionals can work with their government and medical professionals in a positive way. We also identified that there are some very significant psychological issues going on, post-traumatic stress disorder, and often some of these symptoms will not be realized until weeks and months after the trauma occurred. So we want to try and be there for them in that way as well.
Dr. George Huculak coming to us from our studios just back from Ukraine. Thank you for coming in and sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.